Hi, my name's Nina Minetti and I'm Christian's cousin. Today I'm going to show you how to make ricotta gnocchi, which is one of my favorite recipes in my nanny's cookbook. Despite what most people think about gnocchi, they're actually not that hard to make, and I specifically like ricotta gnocchi because there's just a few simple ingredients, and the lack of potato makes it a lot lighter and fluffier, and you can actually eat a lot more. With the potato, it can sometimes be a bit too heavy, and yeah, it's just kind of harder to make when you have to cook the potatoes and mash the potatoes and everything. I always make this recipe with my friends and for my friends, and everyone always loves it. So today I'm going to show you how to make it, and hopefully you'll be able to make it for all your friends and family too. So the main ingredients you're going to use today, like I said, it's a pretty simple recipe. The main thing is ricotta. You need 1 pound of ricotta cheese. You need 2 cups of flour. You need 1 egg yolk, just the yolk. Just half a teaspoon of salt, and whereas in my nanny's recipe she adds butter to the recipe, I actually prefer to omit the butter and add a little bit of Parmesan cheese instead. It's just a personal preference of mine, and I've always made it that way. So, first things first, we just need 1 pound of ricotta. What I like to do here, since I don't usually have a kitchen scale, just look at the packaging. This one says it's 1.5 pounds, and I know I need 1 pound, so that's going to be about 2/3 of the container. So just kind of, do it by sight and feel when you think there's about 1 pound there, and about 1/2 pound left in the container. So that should be pretty good. There are several different brands of ricotta cheese you can buy. I personally prefer a super fine ricotta, so it's a lot creamier. It's almost like a whipped ricotta. This one is not, but it's also good to use in gnocchi. And I'll just start off by stirring it around a little bit, just to make it a bit of a smoother texture. Just get out any lumps. The thing about gnocchi is that there's a fine line between sticky, difficult gnocchi and really lovely, light gnocchi. Depending on which ricotta you use and how much you use, they can end up really sticky and hard to work with, so that you're trying to roll them and they're falling apart when you're cooking them, and it's just a disaster. But you can also get a really nice consistency wherein the gnocchi are just so light and fluffy, and you just have to be really careful about the ratio of ricotta and flour you use. So now my ricotta is all kind of whipped nice and soft and smooth. Next, I'm going to add just the yolk of 1 egg. Separate out the egg white and hopefully use it for something else. So add just the yolk in. And just stir that in there with the ricotta until it's pretty well blended. So now it's like a smooth yellow ricotta mixture. Just set aside the yolk, the white. Now I'm going to add just a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Just mix that in there a bit. And finally, I like to add just a bit of Parmesan cheese. I don't measure it. It's just kind of maybe a tablespoon or 2. Just for the flavor, it makes it really nice in addition to the ricotta, the Parmesan and the ricotta together. So just some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Stir that in. So once these 4 main ingredients are together, you're going to start the process of adding 2 cups of flour. So right now, as you can see, it's pretty liquidy. You couldn't work with that. It's not like a dough or anything. But like I said, you want to be really careful about, skirting the fine line between sticky and moist. So I always add the first cup, just a whole cup, because I know I'm going to need it. And then stir that in with the spoon. And it should start to get a bit lumpy, a bit more dry. Keep stirring it with the wooden spoon until you feel like it might be solid enough to work with your hands. Right now I'm feeling it. It's still really moist. I think if I put my hands in there, it's just going to get all over the place. So I'm going to add just another half cup of flour. I'm always hesitant to add all of the flour in the first go, just because dough is kind of a fickle thing. You just have to kind of work with it, see if it's too dry, see if it's too moist. You can't just jump the gun and add all of the flour at once, or it might end up just being tough and gummy in the end. Alright, now I'm just going to put my wooden spoon aside. I don't need that anymore. Just going to go all in with my hands. Just starting to kind of work it all together so that does become one solid piece of dough. At this point it might still be really moist and kind of annoying. It sticks to your fingers. But it'll be worth it in the end when you have really nice, light gnocchi. Okay, so now you can see it's kind of a ball. I can just pick it up. So I'm going to move from the bowl onto the board. And notice I only added 1.5 cups of flour at this point, and the recipe calls for 2 cups. So I still have half a cup to spare. And with this half cup, I'm going to kind of dust the board that I'll be working on so it doesn't all stick to that. Get all this stuff off my fingers using the flour. And slowly that final half cup of flour will end up just being integrated into the dough through kind of trying to de-stick everything and make it workable. It's never going to be like bread dough, like really solid dough that you can just like play around with, and it'll just be like a solid mass. It's always going to be a bit sticky and kind of almost grainy, like falling apart, but that's a good thing. If it gets solid like bread dough, you've probably gone too far with the flour. So I'm just slowly adding this last half cup as I work it to be the right amount of firmness. So as you can see now, despite a few little clumps falling off here and there, it's not a big deal. It's pretty much just a nice piece of dough. And I'm gonna need to de-stick my hands really quickly so I can keep working with it. Sometimes it just gets so sticky you even have to just run them under water, cover them in flour. Alright, now I'm just going to wash them off real quick. Alright, now my hands are clean. I have my pretty solid dough ball here, and I can really start to work with it and actually make the gnocchi. As you can see, there's a little bit of flour left of the 2 cups called for in the recipe that I actually still haven't incorporated. That's fine. I would always err on the side of less flour rather than more. I know I've sometimes just been so frustrated with the stickiness that I've just gone and added more flour, just trying to make it solid. And I was sorry in the end because they're just not as nice and moist. They're all gummy and chewy. Alright, so here's this nice little dough ball. Should feel nice and soft in your hands. I'm just going to set this over here for 1 second while I clear the board I'm going to use, because it's a really important part of the next step, which is actually rolling out and forming each gnocchi. Alright, board fairly clean. It's good enough. Again, just kind of dust it with flour, preparing your work surface. Now comes the most tedious part of making gnocchi, which is forming each individual dumpling itself. But, like I said, it'll be all worth it in the end. And it's actually a fun step to do. I usually make a double or triple batch of gnocchi when I'm with my friends, and before dinner we're all standing around preparing the gnocchi, rolling them. It does take a while, but it can be fun too. Just grab a knife. Alright, at this point you need a knife and this special gnocchi roller board. I have a few of these, which I actually bought in Italy when I was there. I'm sure you could find them somewhere here, though it might be a bit difficult. Otherwise, a fork works just as well. All you need is these ridges here to make those little ridges on the gnocchi, which are meant to kind of hold the sauce in and add texture. This is a wooden board here, so I like to add a bit of flour to the ridges so that the gnocchi don't stick. With the metal fork, this obviously won't work as well, but it should be just fine using a fork for the same purpose. Right, so from my dough ball, I'm going to cut off a little chunk, just about an inch wide, a few inches long. And I'm going to start rolling it into a snake. At this point, you might still find that it's just a bit too sticky to work with. Don't worry about that. Just keep adding flour to the board and to your hands rather than to the dough itself, and it'll incorporate itself that way and keep it from getting too gummy. So, making a long strip, rolling it, just about as thick as your thumb. Of course, you can make your gnocchi different sizes. This is going to be about the thickness of your gnocchi, but usually should be about the size of your thumb, the width. So now that I have this dough snake, I'm going to cut it at an angle into little dumpling size pieces. Until it's all done. So you can see this little piece that came from the whole strip. You can make them bigger or smaller. You just have to be worried about making them too big because then they won't cook well in the center, but yeah, the size of your thumb is probably good. Okay, before I cut another strip out and do the same thing, which is what I'm eventually going to do with the whole ball of dough, I'm going to start rolling the gnocchi. If you're working with more than one person, we usually like to divide the labor. One person cuts the gnocchi out and another person rolls them. But if it's just you, that's fine. You can do it either way. So, here I have just a normal cookie sheet. It's covered in wax paper. And I'm just going to lightly dust it with flour as well, because this is where my gnocchi are going to go to be frozen before they're cooked. And I don't want them to stick. So I have my floured board, I have my gnocchi, and I have the cookie sheet. Take each gnocchi, roll it like this on the board or on a fork, and then just line them all up so that they're not touching on the cookie sheet to go into the freezer. Now, I was fortunate enough to grow up making gnocchi and working with dough and doing this process hundreds of times. But when I do with my friends, they often have trouble getting this specific motion down, which is the roll. You want to put the gnocchi on the board or the fork, and it should really be just one single fluid motion with your thumb. Like that. Making a little, it's almost like a shell. It's almost hollow inside because you're just rolling it like that. But then they make these nice little dumplings. So you can see now why this might be a bit time consuming, because you're going to do this with the entire dough. But it's fun. I think it's kind of therapeutic. Just working with dough, rolling the gnocchi. Once you get the motion down, you can do it really quickly. So once again, I put this at the top, pinch it at the top, not hard though. I go with my thumb, one motion, rolling the gnocchi down the board, and then kind of pinch it back together. And it ends up just like that, with these nice ridges that you're going to enjoy once the gnocchi are all cooked and finished. Because I didn't add all the flour needed in the recipe, because they are ricotta gnocchi, they're delicate. So just be careful. and make sure they're not touching so they don't all become one big lump in the freezer. But that's what gives them that really, really nice, light, delicious texture. Alright, so round one is finished. Here are my nice gnocchi all lined up on the cookie sheet. And all I have to do is repeat the same process a bunch of times until the dough's gone. Make a snake. Cut out the gnocchi. Make sure your knife is nice and sharp, not all gummy and doughy, because you want to get this nice clean cut gnocchi. Making these ones a little bigger than the last ones. Again, you can do pretty much any size that you want as long as they're not just like big giants, because then they'll just be mush when you cook them. I'm going to put a little more flour on my board, just so they don't stick. And again, roll, roll, roll. And obviously it's not done now, but whenever you fill up this whole cookie sheet, you may need more than one cookie sheet, that's fine. As I'm still rolling them, which is going to take maybe half an hour, to be honest, just going to stick this cookie sheet, the whole thing, once it's all full, stick it in the freezer. And these things are so soft and light, it'll only take about 7 to 10 minutes for them to be frozen enough that they can disconnect from this board. So when you kind of shush them around and they feel solid and they don't stick to the wax paper, you know they're ready to be cooked. Of course, if you don't want to eat them immediately, which would be surprising, but if you don't, if you're saving them for some occasion, they can stay in the freezer for a couple weeks, even a month, and they'll be totally fine. You can get them out and just cook them whenever, so it's a great thing to make ahead of time. Some people do just take them as they are now raw and cook them. I prefer to at least freeze them for 10 minutes just so they keep their form better when they're in the boiling water. And that's usually no problem, because as you're rolling the next ones, the ones before that are freezing, and as you're cooking the first batch that's already frozen, the ones before that can be freezing, and it all actually works out pretty well. Okay, so now I've rolled all my gnocchi. Several batches have been in the freezer for long enough for them to be solid enough to cook. Again, I highly recommend freezing the gnocchi even for 10 minutes before you cook them. It's going to make a world of difference in having them stay together and not become just mush all over the pot. So, as you can see here, the gnocchi are just frozen enough that I can kind of move them around. They won't stick to the wax paper. They're not totally solid, but they're solid enough. Meanwhile, I have a pot of water boiling here, pretty much just like you would do for pasta, filled about 3/4 the way full, and with a little bit of salt in it. So what I'm going to do, this is a very important tool for the gnocchi making process. Some kind of wide slotted spoon or just a big strainer like this. Put your frozen gnocchi onto this, as many as will fit in one. Don't just drop them in, because then it'll splash you with boiling water. and put them into the water. Don't do all the gnocchi at once, but you can do enough just to kind of fill up the bottom of the pot with frozen gnocchi. So I'll do a couple spoonfuls to start. This is again a process you'll have to just repeat over and over again until all the gnocchi are done. Alright, so this first round of gnocchi are all in the pot down there cooking. Frozen, not done gnocchi will sit at the bottom of the pot. And what you have to do, it's actually pretty easy. You don't have to test them or anything. As soon as they float to the top, which you'll see them do in a second, you know they're done and they can be taken out. Should only take a minute or two for them to start doing that. So as you can see, they're starting to come to the top, one at a time. And like I said, these are such soft little light gnocchi. They really don't take that much time to cook at all. Now you're going to get this nice piece of equipment once again. And as they start all gathering at the top, as you can see they're doing here, just scoop them off in little groups. Always make sure you get all the water out, because in the end you'll have a big puddle of water at the bottom of your gnocchi. So just twist them around like that and put them into the bowl where you're going to have them all in the end. So here they are, all coming up to the top. Scoop them off. Shake them around to get all the water off through the strainer. Until all the gnocchi you put in that round are done. And that's it. These gnocchi are done. They're ready to eat. Just put on some sauce, or they're even really good with just butter and Parmesan cheese. I like to make fresh pesto, or of course just a classic tomato sauce, the recipe for which you can also find in my nanny's cookbook. Keep repeating this process with the rest of the gnocchi you have as you take them out of the freezer. And before you know it, you'll be having an absolutely delicious meal that everyone I know absolutely loves.